age of the presentation, how old is the child, whether she is a little one or if she's a big, she's an adult or she's an, we have had a 60-year-old grand, a 60-year-old person coming to us for with a issue with which is neurodegenerative, the systems involvement, the neurological symptoms, and primarily the symptom of pain. So now this one, what can you all see in her? What is it that you all are seeing in this little one? Put it into the chat box. Flat feet, good. Genuvalgum, very good. Lateral tilt, Janali, flat feet, Genuvalgum. Knee deformity on the right. No, she doesn't have a knee deformity. Very good, thank you. I was looking out for this answer, and this is the answer. What you can see is, more than anything, whenever we see scoliosis, you see an asymmetry. Okay, so this child was coming to me when she was maybe a few months old. Maybe she was around 7 months old, because the parents felt that she had a little bit of issues in regulation. The parents are known to me, so they know my version of regulation when I talk about behavior, etc., etc. So they just come for a general checkup of the child, and we found that the child has immense sensory issues, immense. She could not, she was hypersensitive to tactile, hypersensitive to vestibular. She was not moving a lot that time, so there's a little bit of a delay in her milestones. We worked on her for a couple of months. The moment she started walking, parents felt ho gaya kaam, and they continued their way. A few months back, about a couple, just when the COVID started, her mother started telling me, I feel that she's been walking, but she's walking with a tilt. So whenever she starts walking, she leans to one side and she walks. She leans to one side and she walks. So I said, get her. So few days back, maybe the week before that, they came to the clinic, and what we saw was completely, she was walking asymmetrically. She was sort of drifting towards her left side when she was walking. Now, when we saw her, also her little toe on the left foot kept overriding the other toes, and she kept on fiddling with that little toe. That means she understood. She has sensory sensations there. So she removes the little toe and she puts it back into position. So we started. I told her, let's start. So when I see a child of such an age, definitely we have asked for her workup to be done, and we have asked her to meet the orthopedic surgeon. But whatever little bit of assessment what we did, we found that she had you can see this asymmetry in the spine. You can see also that she is having an asymmetry here, up and down. As you rightly mentioned, that the knees are approximating. Now this comes very much from her attitude of W sitting. So she had low tone. She used to lock her joints. She used to sit in W. So all the other things are definitely coming from her low tone and locking the joints, and the way she has been conducting herself in space. She is very talkative. Her cognitive milestones, interpersonal skills, she is very adept in her activities of daily living. But she's extremely hyperactive. She keeps jumping. She cannot hold a task even for maybe 2 minutes. The moment you say, let's do it, she'll play with you for some time and she'll go. So yesterday when she had come, there was a very interesting history which the mother gave is when she goes to her clearing her potty, after finishing her potty, she does indicate her bowel and bladder, but when she finishes her potty, she says there is pain which she expresses in the region of the anus. So that was another interesting history we got. Now, definitely this child requires investigation. So my way of looking at her would be definitely working. We started taping in her. We have started working on her weight bearing, the proprioceptive input. Regarding her foot, I'm planning to give her foot inserts. We are thinking whether to give her, I don't want to give her an A4 for the very reason that she is very soft. She is hypotonic. If I give her A4s, she's definitely going to go worse in the spine than what I would expect her to. So good foot corrections. We have given her pro wraps. We have given her taping and a lot of proprioceptive feedback and tactile feedback. She cannot, she doesn't like messy things in her hand. She's very hypersensitive to a lot of touches. She cannot take sudden touches. So these are things which we have started working on. So that's the way I would look at working on a small child like her. Now, when you're looking at another case like this girl, now this lady rather had come to us maybe a year back with a history of pain in her back, and she has been a executive working in a software company, having a lot of screen time, sitting in a place. So even that time, I think the therapist who saw her, because I generally try to tell the other therapists in the clinic to see adults, and Mihika was seeing her, and Mihika told her to go in for an X-ray, but she avoided. She recovered from that episode, and I think she had another. She was following up with Dr. Mihika for up and down whenever she used to get the pain relief and go back home. So yesterday, 2 days, she has been desperately trying to connect with me, and I thought it was for some other reasons. Suddenly yesterday come the x-rays, and she says, I'm not able to get out of the bed. So I said, what happened to you? She said, no, I was, because of the COVID situation, I have been spending a lot of time sitting, and now it has so happened that I cannot move out of the bed. So I asked her what any other issues that you're facing. Tremendous pain and an asymmetry which she could perceive. So she went, smart girl, she went and she took an assessment from an acupuncturist in Kolkata, who has advised her that there are some calcium deposits in her spine and that needs to be dissolved. There's a big gap in L5, L1, this is what he has told her, which needs to be taken care of, and acupuncture. So misguiding that can happen at every level. I request you all to keep yourself muted. Deepa, can you mute? There's nice music in the background, I understand, but we don't need it now. So principles of rehabilitation, I would say definitely we have to prevent or inhibit the further development of the curve, which may be possible, may not be possible. Very few cases which we have been able to correct the curve completely. There has been one case whom I've seen a complete correction with therapy, and she was a case of idiopathic adolescent scoliosis who was to come to Pavai Hiranandani. Correct postural alignment and asymmetry, the way the child goes and she puts herself into the postures, after sometimes becomes a habit. When you're looking at the systems, there's a lot of debate on which system to we look at. As therapists, we know that scoliosis means we would definitely be looking at the musculoskeletal system. So it is musculoskeletal or neuromotor or respiratory or cardiovascular or proprioceptive, I mean the sensory system. So we had another case who had come to us from Kolkata, whom we shared it with Dr. Nene also. And this child had a lot of sensory issues. She was a case of autism with a very bad curve. She is still following up with us. Needless to say, her vestibular problems were causing her to go more into an asymmetry. So having worked on the vestibular and the tactile and the proprioception, her self-stimulatory behaviors, her behavior by herself of the fear, the anxiety, etc. We could get a little bit of her alignment, which could get corrected. So her body alignment corrected, but her spinal asymmetry definitely remains the same. So what happened when her body alignment got corrected? Automatically her participation improved. So looking at what system we look at completely depends upon what level the child is at, what level of participation you're looking at. So whether it is when you're looking at musculoskeletal system, everything in the musculoskeletal system counts, right from the ligaments to bones to muscles to fascia to joints. We need to take into consideration every little bit of the musculoskeletal system. When you're talking of the NM system, it is the asymmetry which happens in the muscles. So which muscles are firing and which muscles are not firing? Which muscles do I really need to fire in the sense, make them active as a therapist? This is what I have to look at. And definitely sensory systems is something which I would recommend the proprioceptive system and the vestibular system to be looked into, especially in the little ones who come to us with a curve like what you saw in the first slide. Having said that, I would not undermine the effect what scoliosis has or even an asymmetry in the curve has on respiration and the cardiovascular systems, the endurance of the child. When you're looking at other conditions like maybe a neuropathy, maybe myopathy, a neuropathy, a Duchenne's muscular, which may cause, may not cause scoliosis, any other conditions which come to you as neurodegenerative conditions. Now, these conditions you'll have to definitely work on their endurance a lot. So these are the little principles in short, in a capsule, which I can say. Hello, hello. So looking at the musculoskeletal system, definitely when we are looking at the musculoskeletal system, it is the fascia. Now fascia is something which has the property of thixotropy, and when we talk of thixotropy, all of us, it reminds me, we should remind ourselves, it's like paint. All of us may have had painting done sometime in the house. It is like the paint box has been kept open for some time and it becomes solid up. The moment you push in a knife and you find that there is liquid down, the paint is quite fluid there. So thixotropy is the viscosity, it is the denseness with which the fascia come together, and any immobility when you're sitting for a long time in a particular position leads to decreased mobility in that fascia. So number one, you have to start with mobilization of the fascia. So myofascial release, not only in terms of releasing the fascia by giving the cross hand, but there are many myofascial release techniques which we as therapists can apply when you're looking at facial releases. Second, maintaining the hydration of the fascia is very, very important, because after a facial release, it is not just enough to do the facial release. You have to work with hydration. Third, you have to work with muscle coupling, where we use a Yanda's approach, where we work on muscle force couples. After that, strengthen the muscle, and finally correct the alignment. For correction, we do not immediately go to the the brace, but definitely we start with taping. As I said, pro wraps, super wraps. Theratogs are excellent to maintain correction, and last but not the least, you have to look at the brace. So this is what I would say would be my principles to work on the musculoskeletal system. This is the Yanda's muscle imbalance theory, and you can see that all.
मेरा बंद है.
Who was that? There was a siren. Hi, Dr. Nene, you've joined. Welcome. I just spotted you there.
Hi.
Hi. So,
I'm listening.
Okay, thank you. So these are the muscles which are pointed out by Yanda's theory. It's a wonderful theory to work with. Two theories, one is the Saharman's principle and second is the Yanda's theory of muscle imbalance. So we always look at which muscle is not in tune with the other muscles. So it could be your serratus anterior, the coupling between the serratus anterior, the abdominals and the hip extensors, which is not working. It could be the coactivation between your abdominals and back extensors. So when you look at observe the patient walking into the clinic, when you observe the patient playing with her toys, climbing up surfaces, climbing down surfaces, you automatically can understand where is the site of relative flexibility and where is the site which is completely not having any mobility. So extra mobility versus no mobility, muscles which are overworking versus muscles which are not working. And these are important facets which a therapist should understand and put her efforts to see that she can work on the imbalances which are created. Now, this imbalance can happen not only because of the muscle themselves being imbalanced, but as I said, a lot of factors. If you stand asymmetrically, if you sit asymmetrically for a long time, the proprioceptive input which goes into the body through that particular posture is definitely going to cause an asymmetry in the system itself, and again leading to imbalance in the muscles. So that's what this theory says. It is not only one particular muscle, but it is a group of muscles which causes issues. So you can see the correction with taping, what happens, and taping gives really good corrections, very good corrections. But it is not only not taping. First, always working for isometric. To maintain that isometric, give the taping. After giving the taping, again work on the child. Give the parents a good home program which they can carry back home and say, okay, I have to do these 5 exercises. I would say be very crisp when you're giving exercises to parents. Make them write down, make them follow in their own words. Okay, these are the 5 things expected out of me when I go back home. When I also look at the therapy ball as a very important piece of equipment which a patient can work with at home. TheraBands is something what a child can do at home. And as you can see, these are the TheraTalks which maintain the correction very well. So bracing adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. So this was a review, systematic review, which came out of effective literature of effective conservative treatments looking for end results of 5 years of weaning. So they did a longitudinal study in the follow-up of brace treatment, and it showed an initial improvement with the use of brace, a slight improvement compared with the original curve at the time of brace discontinuation, and additional loss of correction at the time of follow-up. So use of brace has to be very stringently used. I mean, you cannot prescribe a brace to every patient who comes to you. Be very stringent and use your discretion. Look at the muscles, look at what the condition is, what is the respiratory capacity. Now, functional training is very important, extremely important when you're looking at a child, an adolescent, an adult, whoever comes to you. Start with TheraBand, start with toys for little children, start with TheraBands for the younger population, go on to weights in the adults, and CVS and respiratory system, as we have mentioned in the previous workshop, in the previous talk also. Doing a lot of diaphragmatic work, very essential, using the incentive spirometer. What this little one is using is the flutter for the expiratory capacity, using again aerobic exercises, using the TheraBand to train expansion exercises. So these are exercises which can help the respiratory system. Looking at the vestibular and visual, a lot of times vision contributes a lot into asymmetry, and this I've seen potentially in the upper curves. So if you can correct the visual system, if you can have the child following up with an ophthalmologist and see how much that is adding, it is an add-on. Definitely, we do not say that is the only cause, but if you can eliminate 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the causes. Look at whether the visual system and the vestibular system can add positively to the clinical outcomes of your sessions. So unilateral vestibular function, or is it bilateral? Look at how, again, assessing the vestibular system is very important. You can do the tests which are there in the CPIT if the patient is qualified for that. If not, your history, caregiver's interview, and also the observation of the child in his or her daily activities, and the clinic becomes very important. Also, many of these kids have peripheral sensory and autonomic nervous system problems. So check for numbness, tingling, weakness, painful extremities, bowel bladder control, sudden temperature changes and flushes. So this can be another system. Fear, anxiety in the adolescent population who comes to us. It is a lot of anxiety. It has a lot to do with their behavior and their participation in society, which needs to be taken care of. So that goes into their psychology. So this is Nehal. I think Sukanya will take up this case. Sukanya, can you do that?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, yeah. So Nehal is a post-op who came to us, and she was an 18-year-old female who came to us with a full-term normal delivery, and she cried after birth. And what happened is the mother noticed a delay with development by 9 months, and so she started physiotherapy by the age of like 13 years. She was referred to spine surgeon, and what that showed was she has kyphoscoliosis with a Cobb's angle of 53 degrees at thoracolumbar spine, levosardosis of the lumbar and cervical spine. T3 to L5 posterior fixation was done by September 2017, and she came to us post surgery to Sneha in March 2018. Now, the complaints with which she came to us was difficulty with walking post treatment and difficulty with standing for longer period of time and stair climbing, to climb up and to descend down the stairs. So the post-op management is slightly different in a case with scoliosis as compared to the pre-op management. And as we can see that she has got the lateral flexion of the spine also, and she has got the flattened curvature of the spine. And from those issues, now she's come to walking independently, and we will see how she walks, and then we can think about how we progressed in her. Dr. Mihika, can you please play the video?
I think ma'am has to share it, or I'll have to share the
Okay.
screen.
Okay.
Mika, I don't have the video with me.
So with the post-op management, the first 6 weeks go with taking care of the sutures, then comes the scar mobilization, then comes the lengthening procedures, and then we start with the strengthening procedures. Now, what do we concentrate main is on
Ma'am, if you
strengthening.
can stop sharing the screen, I can try and share the.
I can talk meanwhile, no?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so here we have to focus more upon the spine strengthening, as well as the hip strengthening, as well as the pelvic floor muscles and your diaphragm. So diaphragm, as ma'am told us, right now we can use various breathing techniques in her.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes, we all can see. So now, as you can see her gait, she yet lacks certain trunk rotation ranges, hip rotational ranges, and so that we go into last. But first we start with a spine patient, with a scoliosis patient, may it be a pre-op patient or a post-op patient. Is we have to think about three things in mind. First is the sacroiliac joint stabilization with your spine stabilization, and once you have the sacroiliac joint stabilized with your pelvic tilts going forward plus backwards, and you have certain amount of spinal ranges which can be done, you go towards strengthening of your trunk rotators, because directly if you start with rotators.
Dr. Sukanya,
Yeah, sure. I'm a bit
slow down.
So when we go to like scoliosis case, if you see a pre-op case or a post-op case, okay, we have to think about three things as a mainstay of a scoliosis treatment. Okay, so first is the sacroiliac joint stabilization, second is your spine stabilization, and third is your the trunk rotations at the spine. Why do we go at the sacroiliac joint stabilization or pelvic stabilization first, and why do we start with spine stabilization first with comparison to dynamic stabilization? Can someone tell this? Okay, fine. So when we start with pelvic stabilization or sacroiliac joint stabilization, at that time we have to think of two major groups of muscles: piriformis, the lateral rotators of the hip, okay, that goes along with your Gmax, okay, gluteus maximus. Now with two muscle groups holding along your sacroiliac joint, you have to go to a spinal stabilization exercises. Okay, now in a post-op surgery, your spinal stabilization will start with your core activation, transversus your transversus abdominis, your pelvic floor muscles, okay, and your multifidus. Just activation, we do not go on to the like dynamic exercises for that. Okay, this goes on for
the
60
last
minutes.
time's presentation, what you had left back behind.
Yes, ma'am, that would do. Yeah. So this goes on for about 6 weeks. Now, in that spinal stabilization and your post-op measures, we have three measures. That is Lyons method, then there is a Dobovitz method. Yes, definitely. Stabilized pelvis will create like stabilized spine. this was this Milin's case, but right now that we are into Nehal's case, I will go into post-op management first. Next. Yeah. So if you have worked in the pre-operative phase, that's good enough. But if not, as this Nehal had come to us, she is a post-op case to us. So with Nehal, we had worked with the local or your deep muscle activation, and you have to start with the 10 repetitions first, and then you want to the 30 repetitions first. Okay, bracing is something which comes a lot with your transversus abdominis and with multifidus activation. Okay, that will give you a lot of pain relief, because pain is one factor that you get to see in post-op management. So with your range of motion, you start with a core stabilization that goes to 6 to 8 weeks, and now this bracing means your core activation goes with your heel slides, with leg lifts. Bridging we will not give because it may cause a certain amount of like locking at your lumbar spine, and that much amount of range, if it is not there, you cannot go on to such dynamic exercises with bridging. Okay, standing bracing we can do. See, first when you start with a core activation or pelvic floor like muscle strengthening in supine position, sideline position, and prone, then you go on to sitting, and then you progress to the same kind of bracing in standing position. Okay, so now with the same kind of bracing in standing positions, and you can perform certain pelvic tilts, like forward pelvic tilt, backward pelvic tilt, and you gain maximum range in that. You go to range of motion in the spine into flexion extension, and then you go on with rotations by 3 to 6 months. Okay, rotations can be started beyond 6 months. Till 6 months, if you have pain in the spine, if you feel there is no range of motion, there is no strength, do not go on to give rotations. Don't hurry up. Okay, then with quadrupeds and dynamic strengthening, we can start at 3 months with leg lifts, with those arm lifts, with the quadratus lumborum and your trunk rotators. Next.
So I would like to add on here. The first thing I always start when a child comes to me, pre or post operatively, as I said, is alignment, number one. Second is proprioception, which is very, very important. The moment you start with proprioception, there are two parts in proprioception, the exteroception and the interoception. So getting the child working and participating in the muscle work, which he or she can do with the alignment for that particular activity, is very important. So I would definitely first start working with proprioception, giving that isometric again, working in the small ranges, and then going on to ranges which can permit her activity in first the plane, which, as she said, rotations come in much later, and that is not intra-segmental. It will be the whole body rotation which will be which you will get, because if you're looking at a fusion, you may not get rotation at all at that particular level. You have to be in touch with the surgeon who has operated onto her, and expectations have to be realistic. Like Nehal came to us when she was scooting. She was not even having anything, and now she's walking, she's performing all her activities, she's cooking at home. But yes, she definitely has her participation restrictions when it comes to her endurance, when it comes to her respiratory system. So these are little things, takeaways, which I would say.
Ma'am, this I have told them in short, actually, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, when I spoke about 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and then 6 months and 8 months. So goals is something you said into the participation. So we can go to Milin's case actually now.
Should I go back?
Yeah, we can go to his case, and I can tell them the pre-op management in details. So last time we had spoken about Milin's case. He was a 21-year-old, a case of spastic diplegia, who had come to us about 2 years back with a case of like complaints of not being able to.
Can we do something, since it is 5 o'clock and
yes, ma'am, actually.
Then maybe he can speak, and then we can again.
Hey, you can go on. I'm completely okay, Snehal. I'm doing other work also and listening also.
Sir.
Okay. So Thank you, sir.
Thank
So we had spoken about this Milind. So he is a case of spastic diplegia, 21-year-old, who had come to us 2 years back with complaints of not being walking, and now he does walk independently. Okay, so last time when I went to his case, I had spoken about the like flexion relaxation like phenomenon. I hope you all have just got through it. If you have doubts, you can yet get back to me. And I will go up to the pre-op management of scoliosis in him. So as I spoke about the stabilization of the pelvis or the sacroiliac joint, ma'am, next can we go slide? Yeah. So first, when we start with the next, ma'am, I had spoken about pain to them. What kind of pain? Yeah. So in the treatment strategies, prior to going on to the self-corrections or telling the patient about home programs, we go on to the lengthening procedures of the spine, and we focus upon hip flexors and the quadratus lumborum in such patients where he has the lumbar scoliosis and he has got the kyphosis at thoracic spine and hyperextended this lumbar spine. Okay. So, ma'am, next slide. So when we talk about the quadratus lumborum elongation, after we do that, what will we start to strengthen first? Okay, when we start with pelvic stability. So your sacroiliac joint is mainly stabilized by your Gmax and your piriformis. And since he had a crouch gait with medially like rotated hips inwards, with your hamstring stuck in there at the knee and your hip having no stability from the hip extensors and the hip and the and uh, and hip abductors. So we go on to the Gmax strengthening, and that can be done in prone position with your sideline position also. Okay, so in prone position, we have to work upon 4 things at the same time. The quadratus lumborum elongation, the patient will stabilize from the front because we have to work upon the thoracic spine, the rib cage, the diaphragm also at the same time. And we start with strengthening of the J-backs also, the hip extensors. Okay, so now if you have to do the same thing with supine position, okay, so prone position with a rib hump may not be, it will be a good position to take, but when we come to the supine position with rib hump, that would be slightly this difficult. And once we have like stabilized the sacroiliac joint with your spine stabilization, so what will this position do is it will give you a good amount of correction with lateral flexion, the scoliosis also, and it can give you this pelvic tilts like correction also. Okay, so ma'am, next. So we come on to the spinal and hip stability with more exercises. Okay, hip rotations can be like performed here uh, with this kind of a thing. Thoracic mobilizations can be done with sideline positions. So here we went like little bit into the manual therapy here. Next, ma'am. So with manual therapy being there, what do we deal with it mainly is what do you use at what time? When the client comes to you with pain, or you go in for mulligans, and that can be used with sideline positions and in standing positions also. The thoracic spine can be just mobilized that way. Okay, and you when you have to deal with thoracic kyphosis, you need to have a lot of teres major plus lat dorsi to work upon that, so that your quadratus lumborum plus multifidus act as your deep spinal extensors, and your lat dorsi plus teres major give you a full thoracic like numbers straightening of the spine. Now, one important thing I would like to tell you all here is, if like supposedly like multifidus plus this quadratus has got 2 functions, so you stress upon one function at like single time. Okay, and then you go on to the 2 functions of the same muscle. Next, ma'am.
So I would like to add on here is my mentor Judy had taught us mobilizations in the pediatric population. So we do a lot of mobilizations for all the joints. But again, it depends on but each case. The effect of what the mobilization is to release a little bit of, or give you a little bit of mobility in that region. It is only grade 1 to grade 2 what we are doing, whether it is the hips or the spine. We are very gentle when we are giving, and when we are looking at the factors of pain, many children may not be able to tell you whether they are in pain. So again, looking at their expressions, looking at what they are doing, being very cautious of your hands when you're giving mobilization. Second, we have to assess the vitamin D and the calcium levels before you do anything to the child or give mobilizations. Even the joint integrity needs to be looked into. Otherwise, just give, if you're not confident, then don't give joint mobilizations. Maybe you can just give myofascial and elongations. Thank you. Sukanya?
Yes, ma'am. So mobilizations, as ma'am spoke, so when we go on to the rotations part, you can use like sideline positions, you can use like sitting position also. So once you have dealt with pelvic tilts and a spinal flexion extension, you go on to the derotation part. Okay, with the patients, you will get a lot of kids who come with a like rib hump with crowding of the ribs onto like one side. So you have to go to the derotation part in there. Okay, so the derotation and the thoracic shift has to be done quite slowly and or like judiciously. And the same thing you can practice upon ball also, which we would be seeing in the like next slide. So ball has to be used quite carefully, quite judiciously. Okay, take the patient quite slowly on the ball, and if he has got this vestibular like problems, and you have to really think about it. Okay, you just cannot place them in prone position, the sideline position on the ball. Okay, thoracic shifting can be done with the ball also. Now in the first picture, as you see the child with the ball into the sideline position, the child can reach in the front also, like backwards also, and thus you can gain some mobility with thoracic spine. Core activation can be started with your knee lifting, with your hand lifting when the child sits on the ball. These are the basic ball exercises that you can do with the kid, and we had tried this on like Milind also. Ma'am, I'm done with Milind, and Nehal's case we discussed already. Thank you. So there was a doubt actually who someone asked actually. Convex side strengthening if we can do, and concave side stretching can we do? See, now when you go in for a home program or you tell them of the self stretching or self correction, so you can do that. Okay, but the first thing that you would think about is your pelvic tilts, your spinal stabilization, and with that going on, we can think of such corrections, because that helps a lot with scoliosis, like definitely, but that doesn't come as a mainstay of treatment, or you do not focus on that in the first go. I would like to take help from ma'am in this.
So I would say it is not about convex side strengthening and concave side stretching. I don't give stretching. I give elongations. I work with the active participation of the child, and very much active stretching would give rise to definite increase in the length. But working with, as I mentioned, I was very clear when I mentioned my principles that I work with muscle coupling. I do work with corrections, but along with that isometric, taping, and then go on to strengthening. Thank you. I think we should now give it to Dr. Ningne to continue, and then maybe we can come back to the therapy part of it.
Actually, we can discuss while I'm talking, because mine is not so relevant to you all, yeah, because I'm going to only talk about surgery, right?
Yeah, that's okay.
It's relevant from the sense that anyone who's doing such high level scoliosis work, I saw what you all are doing, and my congratulations to the kind of results you all are showing. Even that Neha has done so well only because of what you all did for her. So on the on that front, I think you can actually know what surgeons do. because if you're on the same space, then life will get easier. It's a big, huge presentation. I'm going to squeeze down because we'll run through it. So I'll talk to you about what how we look at correcting scoliosis and why post-operative rehab becomes such an important part of the treatment regardless. So just to brush up from the last time where we left, if you recollect, for any curve, these are the minimum 6 or 7 or 11 actually pointers that you need to be aware of. So when you analyze a curve, you have to know, have an idea of the etiology. You have to say whether it's right or left convex. Of course, if it's left convex, there's a high chance that this is not idiopathic. If it's a boy, there's a high chance it's not idiopathic. If it's a small child, young child, high chance not idiopathic. If there are skin markers, it's a high chance that this is non-idiopathic. If there's a pelvic tilt, a genuine pelvic tilt, or a limb length discrepancy, or any neurology, you should be aware of this being a non-idiopathic curve. And idiopathic versus non-idiopathic curves are apples and oranges. They're completely two different playing fields. So you cannot, equate them as scoliosis. They're different diagnosis, different approach, different treatment. Okay. So that said, yeah, these are the red flags, so to say, in scoliosis. So if any of these are seen, you got to zoom out and relook at the problem, because a lot of dynamics will change, as you will see. So let's come to the management principle. So basically, it's quite a barbaric kind of surgery that we do. We put in screws in the bones, we hammer away at the bones and loosen up the curve, and then we try and we call that the Hiranyakashipu technique. For those who know Indian history or mythology, Hiranyakashipu was a guy who ripped someone's chest with his hands. So literally we are using the force of our bare hands to actually correct the curve. But at the end of it, what happens is that the curve is corrected and the spine is held in place. Held in place is a very cute way of saying it's actually fused. Fuse means growth stops there, movement stops and growth stops, and hence it's a barbaric surgery. At the end of it, you're getting a straight but stiff spine, and hence the surgery is excellent if it's done in the thoracic spine. But the minute you start walking into the lumbar spine and start to correct and fuse, it is famously said, as you'll see in one of the last slides, that a mobile lumbar spine, which is slightly curved, is much better than a straight but stiff lumbar spine. So that is where the spectrum kind of starts to get from gray to dark. So the earlier you fuse, the earlier the growth will stop, and hence the child will remain trunk short. His limbs will grow, but his trunks won't grow. And hence, it's a good idea that you want to delay surgery as much as possible. For example, here, whatever is within the zone of surgery is never going to grow. So if this child was small, like it was a pre-first growth spurt child, then you've done this favor by having a straight but short trunk. Okay. Now the problem is that if you wait, you can just wait till kingdom comes. So you can see the pattern, how this curve has grown. If I had intervened here, it might have been too early. But if I wait till this happens, I've got an added on curve, and instead of having a T2 to T10 fusion, here I'm going to have a T2 to L5 fusion maybe. So at the end, I'm doing harm by waiting. So how much to wait and how soon to intervene is really where the gray zone comes in and the skills of the surgeon comes in. But generally, we believe that 40 degrees is a cutoff. Now, why is 40 degrees the cutoff? Like, why can we wait till if the curve goes up to 40 and after 40 we start saying surgery? Because typically scoliosis worsens with growth. That's well known. And once growth stops, scoliosis stops progressing. However, there's a mechanical component also. So if you have the leaning tower of Pisa, no matter what you do, just because the center of gravity is off, it's going to continue to lean. Just like that, once a curve reaches an angle of 40 degrees, that angle, even after growth, merely by gravity, it will increase at the rate of 1 to 2 degrees every year. And hence 40 degrees is the cutoff. Once you see a curve that's more than 40, it means that in 10 years, it's going to be like 55 or 60. So you may as well fuse it. So that is roughly what we say. But this is the key line. You chase the angle till the growth is complete. So you can delay surgery as much as possible. And once the child is as close to growth as possible, but the curve is still within your zone of surgery, that's when you attack. So now this zone of surgery is a subjective phenomenon. Now, what do we do in surgery? Like I said, we put in anchors. Anchors are screws in bones or sometimes hooks or wires which grab the bone and pull the bone to the rod. But in reality, there are some there's some cute procedures we do which might interest you. So we put in screws like that, and then we get in the rods and try and align the screws to the rod. But here are the actual methods of correction, which are just out of interest. They should be in the back of your mind. You should have a general knowledge of this. They are totally of no consequence to what you do, but it's something that you should know because it's within your allied field. So the first is distraction. This used to happen in the 70s, 80s, and even when I was a postgraduate student, we used to do this. We used to just put a hook on the top, hook at the bottom, and stretch the spine out. Okay, and then leave it there. Now this looks quite tacky. It looks quite it doesn't look strong at all. And the correction you get, as you can see, is a very meager correction because you're just pulling the spine out. And hence, the big problem here was that this was done with the belief that scoliosis is a uniplanar deformity, when in reality, it's a three-dimensional deformity. And hence, this only stretches out a twisted spine. So it doesn't really attend to all the three planes of deformity. Remember the last time we spoke, it's scoliosis, hypokyphosis, and rotation. So all three have to be addressed. Here, you're not doing that. And in doing so, you're also stretching out the neural structures, which can cause a problem to the neural elements. I'm just going to take half a second off. I can't,
256 or 512.
512.
The 512 is only for steel grade, phase grade. The 256 is
Okay.
512.
Okay, 250.
There's a difference of only 10,000 bucks. So 256.
Sorry, just one second. One second. Sorry, urgent domestic matters. Are you with me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so one option was to just stretch out the spine from the two ends. The big problem there, obviously, being that you are, attending only to one deformity, and as you can see, the correction is tacky. But more importantly, you're stretching out the neural thread inside, and hence the chance of having a paraplegia post-op used to be very, very high at that time. And however, this is the 60-degree rule, and this again is something which may interest you because stretching or traction sometimes is a bad word in physical therapy. But if someone gives you a rod like this and asks you to correct it, what would you do? You would hold the two ends and stretch it out, correct? And if someone gave you a rod like this and asked you to correct it, what would you do? If you try to stretch it out, people will think that you're doing something silly because it's already a less curved rod. And here you would want to bend it point to point and try and straighten it, right? You would manipulate it. So that is the same rule in scoliosis, that if any curve that's more than 60 degrees will correct best by distraction no matter what. So if you have what I'm trying to say is that if the curve of 90 degrees, no matter what maneuver you use to correct it, the initial correction from 90 down to 60 will happen through a process of distraction. And hence traction or distraction or vertical stretching is not a bad word in scoliosis, especially for curves of higher denomination. All right. And these are some of the cases that we've done. This is just when I was a postgraduate where we've used actually just, distraction technique and get, you can get a great result. Today, we still use distraction for high magnitude curves like these. And we use distraction in growth rods. We'll talk about that a little later. Today, a better way of correction is segmental distraction compression, where we do the same distraction but at small segments. Instead of 2 points, we just push and pull over small segments, and we get a pretty good alignment at the end of the day. These are the more commonly used methods of correction. Translation is where we put the straight rod and then get the spine back to the curve. So something like this. So the rod is straight, the hooks or the anchors or the screws are in the vertebral body, and then you pull the hooks along with the spine towards the straight rod, thus correcting the deformity. Cantilever technique is bringing the straight rod to the spine. So there you are bringing the spine to the rod, here you are bringing the rod to the spine, something like this. That's a cantilever technique. This is used in a more rigid curve and a curve of a higher denomination because you're pushing. When you're pulling, the anchors can pull out of the spine and can cause you a problem. But when you're pushing, it will actually correct. So here's a curve of a very high denomination, close to 80 or 90 degrees with a big deformity. It's in the thoracic spine. Thoracic curves are typically very, very rigid. So here, if you use a translation technique, which means you put the rod on the right side, on the convex side, and from the top, you start pushing the rod down, it will correct the curve. And that's the kind of result that you can get with that. Now, there's something called rod derotation technique. You need to know that simply because you need to know that scoliosis is three-dimensional deformity. So some very clever scientists realized that the AP view or the frontal view of a scoliotic spine looks pretty similar to the lateral view of a normal spine. So what they did was they put the rod in the curved manner, and then they just rotated the rod around in a way that as the rod rotates and the rod starts looking straight, the curve starts looking straight on the AP view, but it gets back its sagittal plane. So it gets back a thoracic kyphosis and a lumbar lordosis. And this is the rod derotation technique. And then finally, there's what we use nowadays is the single vertebral derotation technique, where we actually put screws in every bone because we have gotten better at putting screws in these deformed bones. And we actually physically, forcefully manipulate and correct like this. And, so we can get really good results in, like cases like these where there's a double curve. If you try to rotate on one side, it will rotate the wrong way on the other side. So here, two curves will demand two different, dynamics or two different methods of treatment. And here you would do what is called vertebral derotation technique. So this is a surgical view, and I invite any of you to attend our cases anytime you wish. You're more than welcome. There's some hospitals that don't permit non-MBBS doctors to attend, but there are some hospitals that do permit. So we can, allow you 2 or 3 people at a time to come and watch, because it's a lot of fun to see what is done. It's a 4 or 5 hour operation, but it's worth every minute because it's, as you can see, very exciting. You've, dissected the muscles out, made the bones raw, put in screws and anchors, erected these towers to get a better lever arm. So this is very advanced biomechanics, if you say. Here, the entire set of instruments that went in cost the patient 4.5 lakh rupees. You can imagine what's the kind of, new cars that are available for us to drive. And this is the kind of correction which in the olden days, we would probably not even dream of this correction in surgery. Okay. Now, I put this case in point for maybe as a quiz. So here's a girl who comes from Assam with her scoliosis, and she's very concerned about her the deformity in the back. But on inquiry, she also says she has some leg pain while walking. And these are her x-rays. Does anyone have anything special to say here on examination, on looking at her, on looking at the x-rays? Does anyone need any more information? So as I said, it's a catch case. When you look at her, you will see, number one, she did complain of pain in the legs, which is totally not in line with anyone with scoliosis. A girl who comes with AIS will not have any complaints, except for the deformity. She will not have any complaints. If there's any pain, you got to think twice. You can see that little bump there. This looks quite full and quite, like drawn out. And there you go. When you see the lateral X-ray in focus, it's actually a high-grade spondyloptosis or a high-grade spondylolisthesis of a dysplastic variety. And this is actually the cause of the scoliosis. So this was just a quiz or a eye-opener for everyone, that everyone who comes with scoliosis need not have scoliosis as the primary pathology at either end of the spine. So at the bottom, it could be a spondylolisthesis causing a tension on the conus, which is causing the scoliosis. So the surgery done here is correction of the spondylolisthesis alone, and you leave the scoliosis aside, and over time, they begin to correct. Of course, this is a very short follow-up, but they will begin to correct, and her scoliosis may not need to be addressed at all. At the top of the spine, you can have an Arnold-Chiari malformation, where there's the herniation of the cerebellar capsules through the foramen magnum, and that will cause a similar problem. You attend to that, and the scoliosis gets corrected. I hope that point is clear. Any questions, or have I gone too fast, or it's all good?
Sorry, sir. Can you please repeat once the last thing what you said? Concerning the neck part.
Yeah. So there are two situations where the scoliosis is actually a sham problem. The actual problem is in the spinal canal, and that can happen here. Here is what is called Arnold-Chiari malformation. Arnold-Chiari malformation is where the brain herniates out of the skull. So the brain should be well within the globe. If it herniates out from the foramen magnum, the neural structures are tight and stretching it down, and hence the spine bends to accommodate that stretch. And the treatment has to be done here, not there. You try and correct the spine, the patient will be worse. You have to release this, make the nerve loose, and very often the spine corrects itself. Similarly, it can happen at the bottom where a high-grade spondylolisthesis has caused an imbalance at the base. So, you know, the pelvis and the L5-S1 joints are holding up the entire spine. If that has got listhesed, it's not able to hold that spine up, and to balance itself, the spine becomes crooked. So here you correct the base rather than correcting the crooked spine. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
And the pointers to this are that the child will have some complaints, either a complaint of neurology, or you will find hyperreflexia on examination, or they'll complain of leg pain, something that is not a part of AIS. AIS children don't have any complaints, full stop, dobara mat puchna. They have no complaints. They are brought there by their parents who say that, boss, there's a rib hump or she's looking crooked. The kid is running around and she's the sharpest, cutest, most active kid that you've seen for a long time. That's AIS, adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. Right, now I want to just introduce you to this other concept that which is where the role of a physical therapist becomes more and more post-operatively. So as you can imagine that if you're a carpenter and you have to make this bent structure straight, or if you're an engineer, you would go from the stable vertebra to the stable vertebra, right? You would, as a rule, this yellow line depicts the stability. So if you had to make this straight, you would start fixing from here and end fixing here. So everything else comes within that fixation as a dollar sign, within the zone of stability. Just imagine, just imagine if I fixed from here to here instead. What would happen? You can all imagine that the whole spine will fall off on the left, isn't it? Supposing I decided to fix only from here to here, what would happen? It'll all fall off on the right, isn't it? So logic tells you, the basic principles of geometry or engineering tell you that you got to fix from the center of gravity to the center of gravity. Okay, now this is all easy, but at the end, you will end up fixing every scoliosis from T1 to S1. And what that will do, my first slide told you that you get a straight spine at the cost of mobility and growth. You can't afford that. And hence, today, the aim of scoliosis surgery is changed from getting a straight spine or getting a lower angle scoliosis. The aim is now to correct the curve optimally, not more, but optimally, to achieve a balanced spine rather than a straight spine by fusing least number of segments. So the picture you see here, okay, that's the same picture that I showed you here. But here, see what the surgeon has done. He's only fused the optimum part, or the culprit part of the curve. And that brings us back to the discussion that we had the last time, structural curve versus non-structural curve. Which part of the curve is those bad boys who are never going to change and you really need to fix them or throw them out of the class? And which are the boys who still have the potential to change if the bad company has been taken away? So here the surgeon identifies those bad boys, only works on the bad boys and expects the good boys to align themselves as they have, as you see here. And that is the current aim of scoliosis surgery. So you try to leave, so I told you right at the beginning that we try to leave segments of the lumbar spine unfused. We want to try as much as possible to, sorry.
So would you go in the presentation mode?
Yes. Okay, yeah, there you go. Okay. Right?
Thank you.
So you try to not go into the lumbar spine as much as you can, and try to spare the lumbar spine where you can. And that is the crux of scoliosis surgery now. How can you get a balanced, functional, cosmetically acceptable spine by fusing the least number of levels, especially in the lumbar spine? The thoracic spine is immobile anyway. In the thoracic spine, growth is anyway curtailed. But the minute you walk into the lumbar spine, you're walking into the growing spine. And these are the principles that we follow, where really you want to see if this is an S curve or a C curve. And now this is important for you, because if it's an S curve, so if the curve looks, so we spoke, we discussed the last time that every curve is a triple S. No matter what you see, you got to divide in your head every curve into an upper curve, middle curve, and a lower curve. We call that a proximal thoracic, main thoracic, and a thoracolumbar curve. However, the visual impression on the curve on the left here is a C curve, while the one on the right here is an S curve. All right. So if it's a C curve, the concept is to squeeze the LIV. LIV is the lowest instrumented vertebra, which means that here, if naturally I was going to fuse from here to there, I'll try and fuse up to here and see, or in my mind, when I work up what surgery I'm going to do, I'll try and spare lumbar segments to attain the same result, even at the cost of lesser correction but better balance. While in the S-shaped curve, you talk of selective curve fusion, which means you correct only one curve, balance it with the other curve, which means that supposing if the thoracic curve is like say in this situation, okay, here, if I correct this and these are going to align themselves, then I don't have to go all the way down. So that's what I've done here. I'll show you a few cases in point. Okay, so it's all about balancing the two curves. So why am I saying this so loudly and so, why is it so important for you to understand? Because in a case like this, now look at the x-rays that I'm showing you on the screen. This child, when she comes to you as a referral post-surgery, this is a very, very high responsibility for the physical therapist. Why? Because upstairs, the surgeon has corrected the curve by using strong titanium rods. Downstairs, you have to correct the curve, the residual curve, which is the lumbar curve, which I've left behind for the mobility of the child by enhancing the strength of the muscles to match the strength of the rod. Is that understood? So when we now, as we move into sparing the lumbar spine, we end up leaving the lumbar spine crooked at your mercy as physical therapists to work so well on the lumbar trunk musculature that it will, correct that curve actually. We do this with the belief that that curve is correctable. If that curve was rigid or structural, we are not allowed to do this. So in this case, this is my case again, I thought it was a young child and I tried to do a selective thoracic fusion, thinking that the lumbar spine is correctable, but actually it was correctable, but the child was completely non-cooperative. She was a LUT, fat, hypothyroid, PCOD type, just would not do any exercises, and see what happened as time went. And she needed a long fix afterwards. Okay. So here, if the physical therapist and of course the child had worked hard, instead of going that way, the curve would have actually gone this way. Like you'll see here, this is again one of our kids where we've effectively done. So you see how she looks immediately post-op. You'll be worried about the curve below, but you see after good physical therapy, how that curve has actually straightened itself. So what you see in 2009 is actually better after 3 years. So this comes only by good dedicated physical therapy, working on the lateral trunk muscles, of course the front and back trunk muscles, but you got to elongate the space between the thorax and the pelvis. The entire abdominal cavity has to hold up that building that we've created, because that's a heavy immobile building, and the abdominal muscles or the trunk muscles have to be in a position to balance. If they don't, you get something called decompensation, as you see here, which is self-explanatory. If you fuse too short, you get what is called add-on. Both these may be again referred to you. These are complications of surgery. For example, this child, the first one that I showed, had what is called an add-on phenomenon. Add-on means the same curve actually got worse after surgery. So in this child, if she had come to you, you would have had to work hard on strengthening this side, loosening the concave side, and overall giving her some kind of a traction based, where the abdominal muscles will lift her up. And along with that, asked her to lose weight, asked her to, do activity modification, work on the kyphosis. You can see the thoracolumbar kyphosis happening. So work on extensors to hold the back from falling off. So that's the kind of, patients who are likely to be coming to you. As we get better at our work, you will have to get better at your work. Okay. Is that okay? That's for AIS. I'm going to quickly touch upon early onset and about neuromuscular also. I understand this is slightly boring for you all, but this is basic stuff which, if you understand, makes our life much easier. Any questions? Questions, comments, thoughts? Or can we just quickly move to how does selective thoracic fusion affect the respiratory capacity of the growing child? So we are coming to that just now, Varmeet. That's a very relevant question. The basic question is that if you fuse the thoracic spine in a growing child, what will happen to the lung development? And at this point, I want to introduce you to the concept of EOS. And EOS is the new term given for growing children. So children whose growth is still not complete, which is children below the age of 6 years, 6, 7 or 8. You can, the definition varies. People who present under that age with scoliosis are called, early onset scoliosis. And that is a completely different animal. It is not scoliosis, it's EOS. That's a separate problem. AIS is a separate problem. Neuromuscular is a third separate problem. Don't try to equate them. Don't use the same principles of treatment for all of them. So just to give you a little brief about EOS, the basic problem with early onset scoliosis is that scoliosis surgery revolves around correction and fusion. If you fuse, you've stopped the growth of the child, not only vertically, but also, as Varmik mentioned, in the third dimension, which means that the growth of the lungs, the growth of the abdominal structures, everything will get affected because the box has stopped growing. If the box doesn't grow, how will the content in it grow, right? The box has to grow for the content to grow. So the chest cage has now stopped growing because you vertically fused it. The lung inside is going to get trapped. And that's a very relevant point. And that is the bugbear of treating these. You can't fuse them. If a child comes before his first growth spurt, you can't fuse. You can correct them, but you can't fuse them. If you correct them but don't fuse them, the rods are going to break. Right? Because rods have... Yeah. Okay, not a question. I thought they were talking to me. So there's one form of early onset scoliosis, which is a structural form, where you get something called a hemivertebra. As a therapist, you should just know this photo here on the right, that hemivertebrae come in different forms. Hemivertebrae that have both ends open, as you can see in this X-ray. So they have end plates on both sides. These are called fully segmented hemivertebrae. These have 4 growing spurts, growing areas. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is going to grow 4 times as much as this side, and hence the convex side will rapidly get worse while the concave side will remain as a tether. I hope I'm getting across. So this is the worst form of hemivertebra. The best form is a wedge vertebra, where there's no growing end plates at all. It is a triangular vertebra, but it has no growth plates on either side because there's no disc available, right? So a case like this, where there's an incarcerated or a wedged or a fully non-segmented hemivertebra, the chance of this progressing are very low, while the chance of this progressing are almost 100%. So you got to know that. Also, you got to remember that early onset scoliosis is not idiopathic. It is because of a certain cause. That cause can affect a variety of structures. And most importantly, as the treating doctor, you got to know the 3 commonest systems that are affected in an early onset scoliosis or a congenital scoliosis is the neural system. So you got to get an MRI to look for Arnold Chiari, diastomatomyelia, syrinx, tumor, tether, meningomyelocele, all these conditions. Number 2, the kidney. You can have a horseshoe kidney, you can have an undescended kidney, you can have a single kidney, okay? And even the urethral anatomy could be disturbed. And the third is heart. So cardiac, renal, and neural anomalies have to be ruled out 1, 2, 3 before you even start thinking of treating this child. Because imagine if the child had a big ventral septal defect, there's no role of spine surgery. You got to fix that first, get him alive and kicking, get him, get his color to change from blue to red, and then talk of treating the spine. So remember that these are not idiopathic. You got to delay surgery, as we discussed. So again, these children will come to you a lot because the surgeons will want to put their hands out. They will say, this child is too small for me to fuse. Why don't you look after him? And that's where, again, these kids are really young. They're not in the sensible age where they will follow your exercises. Bracing rarely works for them. So it becomes a challenge as much as for us as for you. And, it keeps getting batted around from one to the other. As far as principles of treatment are concerned, I'd like you to concentrate on that graph on the right side. You may have seen this before, but most children have 2 growth spurts, and a child close to a growth spurt is a hot child. A child away from the growth spurt is a cold child, which means that if your curve is 10 degrees from the age of 1 to 4 years of age, the time between 4 and 6 years is a time when that 10 can become 60, or it's a time when the 10 can remain 10. Once again, from 5 to 10, there'll be the graph will plateau. Once again, the growth will not be a lot of the curve, but a curve that's at 9.5 years of age is likely to rapidly increase in the next 1 year. You got to be aware of this because you are caught unawares. So you see the child and you say the curve is only 30 degrees, you go home and come after 2 years or come after 1 year. And in that time, if the growth spurt has happened from a 30-degree conservative curve, the child comes with a 65-degree surgical curve and, holds you responsible for it. Am I getting across? Any questions? So typically you observe the child as much as you can, but in the region of the growth spurts, that's age 5 and age 10, be extremely careful and, observe him much more, much better. However, if there's a pathology like this, now here, as you can see, there are 2 hemivertebrae, not just one. And you see there's one here and one here. 2 hemivertebrae, which means that there's a 4 times potential of growth here compared to here, and another 4 times potential of growth here compared to here. So in effect, the convex side is going to grow 8 times as fast as the concave side. I hope you understand the math. And here, if the surgeon decides to wait, just see what happens. The case just goes out of hand, right? This is another case, but just see from where to where. I mean, the curve, I mean, why I'm saying this, because here the surgery would have involved only dealing with so much. But here the surgery involves dealing with all this. And this has happened within a couple of years, from, I can read the date there is, I think 2006 to 2008. In 2 years, the curve has become so much. So when you see the writing is on the wall, and this child, the surgeon clearly missed the kyphosis. This child is not a scoliosis child, it's a kyphosis child. And the surgeon kept looking at the AP X-ray and said, "Theek hai, 20 degrees hai, 25 degrees hai, 30 degrees hai. What about the lateral X-ray?" Kyphosis causes neurological deficit. Remember, kyphosis and scoliosis are like heaven and hell. We enjoy doing scoliosis surgery. We hate doing kyphosis surgery because kyphosis surgery is all about neural damage, while scoliosis surgery is about cosmesis, right? So kyphosis has to be dealt with a much different form. Here's another child referred to me. She was admitted in Nanavati Hospital and no one knew what to do. 18 months of age and she was just on a ventilator. She was just not coming out. All the pediatricians had done everything about it, but as someone pointed out some time back, the cause here was the scoliosis was causing inability to breathe. You can see the chest box here, how the ribs look. They are crowded down like a cobweb. And I must say that even I was not too keen to operate this, but the pediatrician forced me. And just with a simple surgery like this is a distraction rod. It's not a fusion, it's a non-fusion rod. The child has never gone back to the ventilator since then, because you can see how the footprint of the lung is opened up. So in this scenario, I can't wait and watch because the child will die actually. So again, I'm bringing to you some situations which are quite different from the idiopathic scoliosis that we've been discussing so far. Okay, the next step that we do, or the next thing after observation, is plastering. And plastering is, has made a big comeback because surgery for early onset scoliosis is strife with complications. The photo on the bottom right is the way we plaster in Wadia Hospital, which is a Desi method of plastering. Actually, plastering involves a very fancy, expensive plaster table. Here we just use the, furkut, like we say, these, wooden blocks, keep the child down. But the key here is anesthesia and correction. Once the child is on anesthesia, you do corrective maneuvers and put a retention cast. The advantage of a cast over a brace is that the child can't take it off. So the compliance is much better. And, you can pin a, much smaller child down, while a brace, if you try to put a small child in a brace, it's like trying to nail an apple pie to a wall. The child just keeps coming out of the brace, but a cast will just hold the child together. Of course, the cast is more cumbersome for the child. There's issues of plaster sores, there's issue of sweat maceration, etc. So you got to find the right balance. But mostly, we like to give a cast which is an underarm cast with an overarm strap to stop the cast from sliding down. And we use braces typically in kids like these, where we've done half a correction and left the remaining half for you. But this child is a few, well and before the age of understanding physical therapy, and she stays in the back of the beyond. So this child gets a brace post-op rather than, and I mean, the parents are taught some physical therapy, but after a few years, then they go to the physical therapist and they start making what we call the internal brace of muscles. Quickly to touch upon the growth rod. So the picture on the top tells you what the growth rod is. It's a same as scoliosis correction, except there's no fusion. So no fusion happens when you use a growth rod. So what is the ideal time to operate an EOS? As late as possible, Manju. The later you operate, the better it is. However, as you saw, as a surgeon, you've got to be extremely skilled in picking out situations where you may have to operate early. So there's no good time, and that's the problem with EOS. So the later you do, the better the bone structure, the better our ability to put screws, the better the skin and the soft tissue cover. However, if the curve has gone out of hands because you waited, you may have missed the bus. So that's the best answer I can give you. It's race between growth and ability. Okay, so a growing rod is what we typically use today for early onset scoliosis that needs surgery. Like this child here has scoliosis, but a big kyphotic bump. This child needs surgery because kyphosis is going to progress very rapidly. However tiny the child is, you can see she's hardly waist height, but she still needs surgery. And here we put anchors. So a growth rod really revolves around, putting, we'll skip this part, but it revolves around like this. You put in anchors at the top and bottom. And as you can see on the picture on the right, you at the end, there's the rod on the concave side is a rod which is fixed only to the spine only at the two ends, but in between there's a domino which allows us to every 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 months go and pull the rod out. So it becomes like an internal brace. It just keeps pulling the convex side. So every 6 months we do a daycare surgery, make a small incision, just distract that domino, tighten the screws again. So that's what a growth rod is. Today there are magnetic rods available where this same procedure can be done from the outside by just spinning a magnet without actually taking an incision. They're deadly expensive, but they're available. The rod on the convex side is fixed at the apex, while these are left open. The ends are left open. You can see the rod is left long. So as this grows, this slides out. So when we do that growth surgery every 6 months, we don't have to do anything here. This just slides at the end, while here we manually distract. I hope that is clear. That's what a growth rod is. But as you can see, because there is no fusion here, ultimately any instrumentation is saved because of fusion. If there's no fusion, any instrument, be it a gold, platinum, diamond rod, is going to ultimately break because of the strains. And these kids are like monkeys. They're just jumping around all over the place. They, are lost to follow up. So breakage of a rod is the commonest, problem that we see in growth rod surgeries. However, if a child who comes like this, where the scoliosis is not ripe, there's just an apical triangular deformity. Once again, you'll see two hemivertebrae. There's one here and one here. So once again, this person has 8 times more possibility of growth on the convex side compared to the concave side. You can just go in and do a hemivertebra excision. So you just, attack the pathology and you don't have to treat the scoliosis. So in such a relatively small operation, you get, you get the correction. The diagrammatic there by Dr. Bhojraj is pretty depictive of what is done. You go in and enucleate that extra bone and then close down, and then the spine grows straight because the culprit has been brought to book. So here the bad boy in class showed up very early and you were able to take him out of the class and the rest of the class became okay. And here's to address the question that we discussed about rib to rib constructs. So if a child comes like this, there is scoliosis, all right, but on top of that, you will see that the ribs are getting tethered to each other. And in this child, the lung on the right will grow very slowly compared to the lung on the left. I mean, there'll be a volume depletion, and this child may be left with bad respiratory symptoms in the future. So here you would do what is called a Vector. Here we've done a Desi form of a Vector because the cost of a Vector is 14-15 lakhs. Here we've just used a 20,000-30,000 rupee rod with anchors, and we've distracted the lungs. Even at this young age, we've like 11-month-old child to get the lungs open. Once again, there's a question: what are the nails dynamically locked instead of static on the convex side? So on the convex side, the screws are locked to the rod at the apex, but are left open at the ends. So the apex is the rod can't shift in the apex, but at the ends, the rod will slide as the spine grows. The anchors will slide as the spine grows. And that's a unique technique which we are using, which has not really been described. Here's one of our oldest follow-ups from over 10 years from, this situation. We've got him here, and he's kind of, grown significantly despite, having a double pathology of hemivertebra with scoliosis added on top. So that's that much on EOS. Quickly, last bit on neuromuscular scoliosis. You must know this. Sorry, I'm taking your time. But it's important that you understand neuromuscular scoliosis the way we do. So neuromuscular scoliosis is a third pathology. Here, the spine is not the problem. The spine is fine. The supporting structures are a problem. And you must remember this mast of a ship photo in your head all the time. In your spine, the mast is the vertebral column, and the dynamic supports or the ropes around the mast are the muscles. And if these muscles don't function, as soon as the ship is out on the sea, the mast is going to collapse. And that's what happens in the neuromuscular scoliosis. You can have either too tight ropes or too loose ropes. So paralytic scoliosis versus spastic scoliosis. And these ropes are not only affecting the spine, but even the pelvis. So these are the specialties of neuromuscular scoliosis, that here the pelvis becomes your last vertebral body, unlike any other form of scoliosis. And invariably the pelvis also gets affected. And hence you get long collapsing C-shaped curve. They don't follow any pattern. They're just collapsing. And they collapse not only in the AP plane, but the lateral plane also. So you have kyphosis rather than lordosis. They can be too floppy or they can be too tight. You know this. And pelvis is always included. And hence the rules are completely different. You can have a kyphosing spine or a sway back spine. So you got to see the person. Of course, this is an X-ray, but you got to see the person on a lateral view and see where the center of the tragal line is falling. And very often they have a sway back problem, which means the lumbar spine is falling back. And here you need to work harder on the abdominals if you do. and sometimes they're falling off in the front, so you have to work on the back muscles. Sorry.
He's got green and he's got steel grey for that, whatever, the grey and green. Grey or green? Green was there.
Green.
Huh?
Green.
Green. Take green. Chalega, okay.
Now, here are the causes of neuromuscular scoliosis. You all would know these causes. What I'm trying to get at is that neuromuscular is neuropathic or myopathic, and sometimes a combination, right? So neuropathic will cause more spastic kind of symptoms, except some syndromes which are lower motor syndromes like poliomyelitis, etc. And of course, traumatic like post-traumatic paraplegia also you get scoliosis. Myopathic are I think you all see more often, muscular dystrophies and all the Friedreich's, etc. I mean all the muscle-based problems. These are you don't need to know this. Generally, you got the things that you got to really gauge are: is this a walker or a non-walker? Is this a liver or a non-liver? Is this child going to survive? Like Duchenne's could be at the last 6 months of his life. And walker or non-walker, very important in decision making on surgery, and we'll quickly come to that. And what's really the life expectancy? These questions are never asked in early onset or in idiopathic scoliosis. These are always asked in neuromuscular scoliosis. The bone stock is very poor. The muscle mass is very poor. So both of us, we work on the bones to correct the spine. You work on the muscles to rehabilitate. We are both on very bad wickets, and the response to both is very, very poor. And the thing that we found is that if you try to do selective fusion, because there is no supporting musculature, no matter how hard the physical therapist works, it's doomed to fail. And we like to do, long fusions. Cerebral palsy is one of our biggest challenge, because it is famously said that surgery in cerebral palsy, I'm being a bit cynical here, but surgery in cerebral palsy makes the child different, not necessarily better. And here's one of our kids with cerebral palsy. You see he's tilting off on the right. And, we thought we'll do a smart job, and you see the x-ray looks like we've really straightened him. But what have we actually done? We've only straightened the spine. The spine was slave to the tight muscles. As soon as it got, as soon as some time went, the muscles again became tight, and now the spine bent above and below. So practically the operation did nothing to him. In fact, he was a bit worse eventually. So here, if at all you have to do something, you have to just make the whole spine straight from the pelvis. Otherwise, the child will tilt to one or the other side. Better is that you leave a CP alone. And, at least you guys, whatever, interventions you all do are not interventions. So even if it doesn't work, it's not going to do harm. Here he's had a big surgery and, he's still no better, or maybe he's a bit worse. So we typically go the whole hog, and whole hog includes the pelvis. And once you do that, the spine gets fully well erected from the bottom to the top. And you got to factor in limb length discrepancy. And I told you, when we examine the child, you've got to examine the child in the sitting position also. So when the child sits down and the scoliosis becomes less, it means there's an LLD involved, limb length discrepancy. Of course, you can do true measurements, but very often we are not so good at doing those measurements. So just examine the child seated from the back, and if the scoliosis reduces, there's an infrapelvic component to this, and that is very, very common in these neuromuscular scoliosis. But this is the kind of surgery that's done. Again, it looks very, very big, because you got to do it from the pelvis to the top. So not give the muscles any chance. You just take law in your own hands. But because these are floppy spines, you can see at the bottom, the correction can be dramatic. You can get dramatic corrections. Kids gain, centimeters in height. And this child was a singer. And I think Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and he couldn't hold his R. Now the question that people will ask is, why did you want to operate him? He's Duchenne's, he's going to die, number one. He's a sitter, he's not a walker. So what happens is that a sitter starts to lose his balance while sitting as he gets more and more scoliotic. And for that, he starts using his hands to hold himself up, which makes him dysfunctional, because for a person whose legs don't work, his hands are his legs and his hands. And if you get them defunct, they are extremely disabled. So this child came with two complaints. I'm not able to use my hands, and I'm a singer. I'm not able to hold my R. I used to hold an R for X seconds, and now I do R and I run out of breath. And literally after this surgery, he was, back to stage performances. He lived for a few years, and then, of course, what Duchenne's does to everyone happened to him. So that's my game, guys. I know I try to rush in a lot. I had to pack in a lot, but since this was asked of me, this is what I spoke. So if you have any questions or doubts, I'm more than happy to answer.
Sir, when you say you will observe any curve, how frequently you ask for a follow-up or a imaging?
So once again, different for different formats, but idiopathic scoliosis, when we observe them, we ask for a clinical check every 6 months and typically radiological check every 1 year. Early onset scoliosis, roughly the same calculation, but we educate the parents about monitoring growth, monitoring height. They sometimes send WhatsApp images every 3 months, so we observe slightly more closely. And closer to growth spurts, we call them every 3 months. Neuromuscular scoliosis, they only come. Like we don't have to tell them anything because neuromuscular scoliosis typically the patient comes asking for surgery. You don't have to tell them anything.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I think the biggest mistake you will make is to call the patient every time with an X-ray. Don't ask, be very, very, very stingy about the X-ray because these kids have about 20, 30, 40 X-rays done before they are adolescents. Because every doctor asks for some X-ray, there's an X-ray chest, there's an X-ray AP lateral. The only X-ray worth its salt is an AP standing X-ray. But invariably they come with a packet of 10 X-rays which have all been done wrong. Either the upper spine is not seen or the lower spine is done lying down or is not done lateral. So don't ask for an X-ray until you're absolutely sure that you need an X-ray. That's what I tell them. That don't get an X-ray. Let me see you and decide. We'll get an X-ray done next door if I need it. Because it burns their genitals and they just have either breast cancer or they have sterility. Any other questions? Yeah, just shoot if there's anything. You got the crux of it, right? You're going to get more and more people who've been instrumented half, and the remaining half you're going to have to work on. Typically, we expect you to work on trunk muscle strengthening, abdominals, sides, obliques, strengthening, balance techniques. So writing techniques, like what balance techniques are. And then gait training, because these kids are, most of them have been used to a crooked spine for a much longer time, running into many years. So when you straighten their spine, they start getting a bit off balance. Their pelvis has to accommodate, their legs have to accommodate, the gait changes. So functional treatment is the next one. But once again, it's different cases come with different problems. Like idiopathic scoliosis typically almost never needs a post-op backup, while a neuromuscular will need lifelong backup from a physical therapist. Okay. Superb. So Snehal, you want to take over then?
Yeah, that's good. Wonderful session I think we had, and good sharing. We should keep in touch, and there were many. I mean, once you start doing this and you realize that there are so many cases you have worked on together. Even that Anu from Kolkata, she had also, she's not improved in her curve, but her general participation is definitely better.
Yeah. You keep them engaged basically.
Yeah, we have started. So good. I'm happy that we had this session as a beginning, and we look forward to few more sessions in future also.
Yeah, it's my big date with 55 pretty women. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you everyone, and we are also having in recent months, maybe we may be hosting a couple of workshops. I think the Learning Wednesday team will keep you all informed, and do keep in touch with all of us to know about our further activities. Thank you so much.